If you got power windows in your Cougar or Mustang, you probably know what I'm doing. It's time. I can't get them up anymore. All 4 windows in this car just creep up, and only with help. Well, a few years ago, what would you have done? You would have had to spend big money. There's only so many new in the box pancake motors. That's what I call these because they kind of look like a pancake. There's only so many NOS motors floating around. They go for huge money if you can find them. Finding a good used one in a wrecking yard, forget about it. Not going to happen. The front ones are no big deal. This basic design was used into the 90s. We have these on our website, left and right. Not much money. You don't worry about rebuilding these. Don't worry about finding NOS. Just buy a brand new one and be done with it. The pancake motors, on the other hand, these were never really meant to be serviced. You take this to a local guy that specializes in electrical repair, he's not even going to know how to get it open. Well, today we're going to give you the trade secrets on how to R&R your power window motor. But before you tear yours apart, do know this. We rebuild them, we do a quality job, we stand behind them for 90 days, but if you tear it apart and fail and send us all the pieces, there's going to be an upcharge. So we sell them on an exchange basis. If we open up yours and it's unrebuildable, we're going to take parts from ours and we're going to make yours work. But if you fail, you failed. It's going to cost. So you need to choose before you even dive into this project. You going to let us do it, or are you going to do it? Another exciting thing is we've just reproduced all the power window switches. There's 2 different versions depending on if it's in the driver's door or passenger, and there's a lockout switch. These used to be, used ones would go for 50, 80 bucks. I've seen them go for 100 bucks before for a used single power window switch. These are spot-on reproductions, and they're on our website for a fraction of that. So having a car with power windows just got a little bit easier. I'm going to turn this job over to Richard. I figured it out years ago on how to rebuild these motors, and I've given him a little bit of schooling, and he's ran with it. He's way better than I ever was with these because he's an electrical guy. He understands this stuff. So Richard is going to take over from here and show you how to change these motors and do it properly and rebuild them if you want.
Well, I guess as you heard, Don's handed over a project to me about rebuilding the pancake motors in his convertible for the rear windows. So what we're going to start with is getting them out. We're going to take out the back seat, which we've already done, and then we'll remove this quarter panel. Okay, now once we have it loose, the switch is still attached. Now these switches, they have screws on the back, one coming in each side that holds this faceplate to the panel. Kind of work your way back in here and unscrew it. Whoop, it came unplugged, but it shouldn't have. And I'll show you why here once I get it out. Okay, once the screws would have been out, it would have come out, but there's 2 tangs right here, these little clips that hold this switch together. And when that gets pushed back on there, you can see those clips come over and lock onto that switch. With this all screwed together, it makes a tight fit and shouldn't come out. Here's the motor. Here's the regulator to the window. You've got 2 bolts here, and unfortunately with a convertible, you got 2 bolts inside here that are just buried. If you look straight down where the window is, you'll see that's the back of the top bolt. About 4 inches below that, straight down, is the bottom bolt. Yeah, ain't this fun? Okay, on the bottom one, you still have to come up from underneath, but you can get a ratchet and a standard socket on it, as long as it's a 1/4 inch. And now we have the second one out. Caution, you can bleed a little. Okay, now we'll take the front 2 out. At this point, before we do that, down here on the bottom, the arm that goes from the motor to the window mechanism has a little clip on it, and we'll have to get that off. It's not like a cotter pen or anything, it just pops on or pops off. Okay, and then it's got a washer on it. There it is. Okay, we got that off. Now we have to pull the arm off that. What I did was I put a pair of pliers there and kind of twisted it as I was prying it. So now we're off the window and we can slide the window up. You don't want to attempt to pull this Pancake motor and regulator out because you're going to have to twist it and turn it around in there with the window there. It's easier if the window's up, then you don't scratch the glass. The motor has to be in the full up position before the glass can pass that. So now we have the motor in the right position. We can slide the glass up. So it's up and out of the way. And now we'll take the last 2 bolts out of the regulator and drop it out. Okay, so now I'm going to reach in here and hold this motor while I take the last bolt out. So now that we've got the Pancake motor loose, now it's a Chinese puzzle to get it out of this hole. Alright, we found that spot and out it comes. Sometimes if you have that battery charger available, you can move this around to get a better perspective, but once you get it in that spot, it'll come right out. So there's the motor and the regulator. Now we're going to go rebuild it. Okay, now that we've got this out, you've got 3 screws that hold the regulator to the Pancake motor itself. And you can see one of them's buried. Now if your motor won't turn at all, you're going to have to pry this up, and we're going to show you that here in a bit. Or if you can, if it will move somewhat, like I say, you can hook your battery charger and this regulator will turn so that you can get to that nut, that screw. Now, because this one has a strip nut plate, we're going to go ahead and show you how you can just bend this tab. Just bend it up. It's soft. And then what we'll do is we'll pull the gear up off of the motor itself and work your regulator around so that you're to that screw. And we'll separate the motor from the regulator. And that's it. Okay, now that we've got this motor out and we know we have a bad regulator with the strip screw and the bend, and this is a service replacement. We have this rubber coating. You'll notice the wires are kind of smashed. Rather than spend a lot of time cutting this one open and trying to get this rubber coating off, we're going to go ahead and rebuild another one that we have. We're going to go ahead and rebuild this one, and we're going to go ahead and use this regulator as a replacement regulator for the strip screw. Okay, now that we've got it out, we got the regulator off, we kind of want to just look it over, make sure all that the tangs are still on it, that it hasn't been opened before. Just kind of looking to make sure that the wires aren't broken and cracked, the pigtail's still good. That's what it looks like. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start to disassemble it. We'll take this rubber cup off. Now I always like to just kind of put a little towel there with all the pieces as we're coming off in order. There's a pressed on kind of a clip here. We're going to gently pry that. Kind of keep your finger on it because it has a tendency when it comes it'll pop and go across the garage floor, and you'll find it when you move. There's also a little rubber O-ring that's under that, and that's to keep water from going in there. Now we're going to take around the gear piece here. Now this grease is awful old and crusty, and some of them you'll find the grease has gotten so hard as a brick. So just kind of gently pull it up, and that's what we're looking for. There's a spring in here that's coiled around and holds this piece in place. So that's the next thing to come out. Actually, now that I see it, I remember, you can just see the two tangs of the lock washer. There we go. And then just work it around and off. There it comes a little bit. There we go. Okay. That's the piece that locks into the armature. We'll see that once we get it out. Here's the spring that kind of holds it in there. Alright, now we're ready to break the halves. And what you've got here is these tangs are all the way around. Now I found these will break very easily, so you want to be very gentle about prying them up. I just try to pry them up a little bit, just enough to where you can get a pair of pliers on them. Work your way all the way around. Now this gray putty is the sealant that they use when they seal them, and we'll redo all that when we get it back together. Then you can take a pair of pliers and just very gently pry them up. I like to use something like water pump pliers where you can get a hold of the back side as well as the front side there, and you're not actually prying on the, you're not putting a lot of stress where they'll crack. I found this breaks the fewest. Don't try to bend them way over. You want to just come up straight enough with them to where they'll let you take the cover off. Now we're going to stick a screwdriver in here and try to pry them apart. The problem you'll run into, or what you've got to be very careful about doing, is not sticking a screwdriver in so deep that you catch that armature that's inside, because you'll damage it. So you want to just go along enough to try to get, you'll find there is a wide spot kind of between the two. And sometimes you find rust and corrosion where the water has laid inside of them. That's what kills them. Here's your armature. What you're looking for is make sure the bushing is still there. Those little bushings will come out. There's one on each side. This is the cover. Okay, here's your brushes. And there's your contacts. Now these contacts and brushes look pretty good. Always kind of pull them out, test them, look at them, make sure they're still long enough. They just come out really easy. Make sure the springs are still in them. Of course you can tell that just by pushing on them, but I like to see how long they are so you know how much brush life you got left. These are just a little bit shy of what a normal brush looks like. A normal brush would just be, you know, just a little bit longer than these. So I'm not gonna worry about those. We'll go through and clean these real good again. But I always want to look at the solder and the wiring, where it comes through and it's pinched, that it's in place. Contacts not froze. And then we have the gear drive, the phenolic gear. And this one's froze in there, probably from corrosion. There again, see the corrosion? That's from all the water laying in it. That's what this stuff is supposed to do. It's supposed to prevent water from going in them. Something else you might want to consider is the magnets still glued down pretty good. Now comes the hard part of cleaning them up. Normally what we'll do is we'll take all this old stuff off, and you just got to dig at it. And when they're like this, we'll give it a quick media blast. You can use a brake clean. We'll clean these out real well, but you want all of this old grease, just clean them up, because all that stuff will get down in the new motor Once you've rebuilt it and cleaned it up, that'll all come back and get down in it unless you get it all out, and you want to make sure it's really clean. Same thing with this side. Okay, now that we've got the covers all cleaned up, like I say, the sandblasting really makes it nice, but you could do the same with a wire brush and a drill. But you want them as clean as you can get. Now we're going to take and inspect the armature, and we're going to clean it first. And what I did to make this easy for me is I made a board, just drilled a couple holes in it so I can set this armature down flat, because you don't want to flex it, you don't want the armature to be bending while you're cleaning it. I take a little of electronic switch contact cleaner, just spray a little bit on it, and just use a pink rubber eraser and just clean it. Sometimes you won't get it all off, but mostly what you're doing is you're just cleaning off any kind of a corrosion or anything that's on the edge. What we're going to look at now that's clean is for any breaks, any damage. We're going to turn it on its side and look all the way around it, because those will go off kilter if they get squished or crushed. I have pulled one from another one that we opened up, and this is sometimes the damage you find in them. Sometimes that's caused by sticking your screwdriver in too far and you catch the tips of these. Sometimes it's a gear motor will freeze and it'll just rip them. But you want to make sure they're all there. And then I'm going to turn it over, and we're going to do the same on this side. Now we're going to put that back on there, and because of the magnet it's going to want to bounce and flop around a little bit, but that's okay. Okay, now we're going to put the cover plate back on. Now you're going to find this cover plate with the magnet is going to want to jam all over, and you want to be very careful about those points on that. So I always like to start here, bring it kind of down over that edge there, and then you can center and just drop it in. Okay, now the armature should still spin, and you should still be all the way down, all the way around. Make sure you're down good here, and that you're not up on the edge of the lip here, that you're down on this part of it. Okay, now we're going to put the gear back in. Where'd the gear go? Okay, now we're going to set the gear down. It doesn't matter which way the gear goes. It can go either way. You want to make sure that it's clean, but it doesn't have to be sparkling clean, because we're going to put grease back down on it. And what we're going to do is these ridges is where this gear rides. So I like to put just a little bit of grease on each one of those ridges, so that as it goes around it gets lubricated. Doesn't need to be a whole lot, and don't worry about if you get too much or gobs or something, it's not going to hurt anything. So, and then maybe a little bit around where it sits here. Alright. Okay. Now we're going to mate these back together again, and again I like to put some grease right on that, right there where that gear rides. There's all kinds of different things you can use to seal this with. You can go to your hardware store and just get any kind of a hard sealant. You don't want it to ever get hard. I don't recommend using an RTV, because it'll crack and shrink and expand with heat and cold. We use a 3M strip caulking. It's black, it just comes in a box. And what we do is I'll just peel off a chunk of it here. Now we're going to lay it down in this groove between the edges. We want to lay it right down in there. Okay, and same way all the way around here. You don't want it real thick. Otherwise, when you put the two halves together and you go to crimp them, you can't get the crimps down tight. With this type of stuff, I like to pull it a little bit, and I'll just work it down in there. You don't want to pull it too hard. As you can see, it'll get skinny. Just kind of working that around in there. Okay, as you can see, I've got it all the way around. Highs and lows isn't all that important, because as you push this together, the ridge on this side is going to push down in there and kind of spread it a little bit. So now we're going to put it together. Again, you want to line your brushes up with a hole. Okay. There we go. Now you're all together, and what I do is I will take a series of vice grips and clamp it, and I'll work it down a little bit tighter and tighter and tighter as I go. Just keep working it down all the way around. If you have multiple vice grips, you can clamp here and here and there, but I kind of like to get the feel of it sometimes. You can feel it squishing down if you have too much. Once you feel it, you can almost feel it get real hard. Okay. Now you don't want to get it crushed so hard that you push the sealant over in there, because what will happen is you'll push that plate that's around on top of that armature, you'll push it against the armature and the armature won't turn. So you don't want to get real crazy about crimping them down tight. Once you think you've got it where you want it, I just take a small ball peen hammer and start bending the tabs as I work it around. I don't try to take pliers and bend them back over just because they have a tendency to break. I have found just gently tapping them does a better job. So that's what we're looking for. We're not pushed over down flat, we're not crushing it, we're just pushing it over so that the edge does get a crimp. Now we're going to put our O-ring back on it. I like to take just a dab of grease to, some of these O-rings are so old and so hard, a little bit of grease will keep them soft and pliable. Then you take your washer, your lock washer. Now, well, I'm going to take this socket, it's a 1/4 inch socket, and set down over the top. You can see how it just fits really well over that lock washer, and just tap it down. Okay, now we're going to take this piece that was part of that spring assembly. Again, we're going to put a little bit of fresh grease on it. Okay, this spring goes on, and these can be a booger. You want to make sure that the spring, you have a tang that's going to catch one side, and then it's got to go all the way around and catch the other side, so that you're going to have to kind of wind the spring. Okay, now you see how the spring catches the top here, and it's caught the bottom down there. See, that's the bottom of that spring, and it catches this side of the drive, and this one catches this side of the drive. Then you push it down in, back into those two grooves. Okay, now the spring's in. That's the hardest part, I think, of the whole motor, is trying to fight that spring in there. And you won't see this, I don't see it very often, but just because it's a gear tooth, I like to just kind of run around and kind of just make sure all the teeth are still in good shape and they're not broken or beat up at all. So it looks to be in pretty good shape. Again, I'll just put a little bit of grease on it around the shaft. Set it aside, because now we're going to put the C-clamp back on. And there's a groove that this C-clip fits right down here. There's the groove. You can just barely see it. So we're going to set that down there. Okay, we can tell the C-clip is seated in the groove. Okay, now we're going to put this gear back on the top. It'll only go on one way, and generally it'll go on with the spring side. This side is narrower. So now we're down. I'm going to put a little grease on the top of this. Just, if nothing else, for me, I just kind of feel it helps as a water seal there. The rubber boot goes back on. We'll put the 3 screws back in it. Okay, now we're ready to test it. So what I'm going to do here is hook up my converter, positive and negative. I just have me a switch. Positive and negative, doesn't matter which way, because positive is one way, negative is the other way. So now we're going to test the motor. And there we have one way and one way. So now we have a working motor. Now, before we actually ship these to you, I will actually mount it into a regulator and pick up 10 pounds of steel weight and make sure that the motor not only picks it up, but holds it in all of its positions, both up and down. So when you get one of these rebuilt motors from us, it's going to work, it's going to pick up weight, so it'll push your windows up and down for a long time. But that's how you rebuild a Pancake motor.